faster internet. And Ellen is the convener of the Good Web Network and will be chairing the event today about the Good Web Network and how we can work together. But I want to say personally thank you to the Minister for taking part in this, and thank you to Ellen.
Thanks, Polly. So thank you all so much for coming. Just to echo Polly's thanks, and thank you for the applause at the beginning. Always a good way to start an event. This is the first event of our Good Web Network this year, and we're absolutely delighted that we're able to be joined by Paul Scully MP, who's the Minister for Tech and the Digital Economy in the newly created Department for Science, Innovation and Technology. DSIT, I believe, is the correct. I'd love you to stay around. So our mission with the Good Web Network is really around how we can be developing this roadmap for how we build towards a better internet and future of technology. And a lot of the principles we talk about when we think about the good web, we talk about user empowerment, we talk about choice and diversity of online spaces, we talk about interoperability and data protection and all of these things, which all link so closely to how digital markets are operating. And that's why digital competition regulation is such a crucial lever to apply, and that we're really excited to be talking about. So I'd love to just start with, I guess, a bit of background about you and what drives your kind of interest in these areas. And in the spirit of the Good Web Network, what is your vision for the positive vision for the future of digital technologies?
No, thanks, Ellen. It's a real pleasure to be with you, Scooby. I'm hoping my voice is going to last. I've got a bit of a hacking cough. But it's a really exciting time to be in this role, especially one of the first ministers in the new department. We've got we're only the third country in the world to reach $1 trillion tech ecosystem. We've got more unicorns than any other European country, more than all apart from, I think it's India and America. And those unicorns are spread out amongst, they're not just all in London. There's at least 8 cities in the UK have got 2 or more unicorns. So, as part of that levelling up, as part of that spreading opportunity to make sure the UK is the best place to start, to grow, to scale a tech business, whatever that is, whether that's hardware or software, web development, etc. That is really, we're seeing that, but that's not just government getting stuck in. It's actually the tech businesses feeling that they're building their own ecosystem. I always have 3, I suppose, buckets of approach that I have to, whether it's when I was in Bays, working with small businesses, or now, what is it I can do to make sure government gets stuck in and does something? What can we do to make sure government literally backs out of your life and lets you crack on and develop great businesses in this case? Or what is it that we can do to use our convening power to bring people together, to make sure that we're better than the sum of our parts, to make sure that we can signpost all the great work that's going on. And what we've had until throughout all that time building that great ecosystem, we did that whilst the business department was in one area with energy, which had been previously a massive department on its own. You had digital sitting with culture, media and sport, and international trade just around the corner here. And it's all a little bit fragmented. So what we've done, in the same way I was just talking about convening, we've got to break down our own silos in government. Government's one of the worst places to build up silos, barriers and little fiefdoms. So now you have UK business and international trade working together, because we've been trying for years to get start-up businesses to think more about exporting at an earlier stage of their journey. So having those 2 departments working cheek with jowl means that they can get that together. Means that energy can be unleashed to work on its own, with Grant doing energy security and net zero, but it brings George Freeman and myself together. So he does science, I do technology. He's got the bigger budget than I, and he's literally next door, so fab. I can knock next to to make sure that we can get this working. And so when we look at technology, when we look at the good web, good internet, so much of this starts off first of all about skills. How can we encourage digital skills and AI skills as well? And I don't just mean, although it's a lot of it skills that go through to work for Cisco, to work for Google, to work for Amazon, whoever. It's actually digital skills in the wider sense of the word. But so every business has a tech element to it, or digital element to it, whether that's a plumber who uses Sage Pay so they can press a button, create their invoices, press a button, the other person can press a button to to pay them, means they can spend more time plumbing rather than worrying about their accounts. Through to L'Oreal, I was promoting some work L'Oreal were doing the other day with the British Beauty Council, showing that actually, yes, they're a makeup company. People think of them as a makeup cosmetics company, but who develops them? Scientists. Who actually markets it and does the technology and drive around that? It's the technologists. So all of those areas need tech skills, but we can only do all of this. And actually, I finally talk about skills, about AI skills as well, because AI is becoming ever increasing, powering companies, but also the kind of web applications and platforms that we're going to be talking about. And we know there's a shortage of AI skills, and we want to encourage that sort of future-looking view. So one of the areas that we're looking at in AI skills is AI conversion courses. So people that haven't come from a STEM background or a computer science background, encourage them to hop over on a conversion course, and for every course that's paid for by a private company, government will pay for 3. So we're trying to do that. What that does, as well as increasing your skills base, it increases diversity of thinking. So it's not just diversity that we all talk about, having more women, having more ethnic minorities starting up business, all of which are important, but the whole point about engaging wider groups of genders and ethnic backgrounds is to get a diversity of thinking into the end product, into the careers, and so that's a real sea change if we can get that right. But I talked about the fact that we've got to have a good web, and we've got to have a good regime to make sure that it's all done on a level playing field. So we have 3 major bits of legislation going through at the moment. You'd have seen the online safety bill morph over the last 5 years into where I think we are now is quite a good balance between protecting freedom of speech, but making sure we can pivot back to a child protection bill, effectively, bit of legislation predominantly. But it's not technology specific, it's flexible, it's proportionate. You then come to the digital markets bill, which I guess is a lot of what we're going to be talking about today. Again, it's proportionate, it's bespoke, so it's not trying to pin us down to the traditional sense of competition. I think there was someone, I think you said there's some people from the CMA here, so I'm sorry because my role when Bays, having done subsidy control, having done UK internal markets, my ministerial career seems to have been giving the CMA more jobs to do, and now giving you the DMU, the Digital Markets Unit, which is in shadow form at the moment. Really looking forward to getting that on board. But traditional competition regime looks at companies and they say, okay, fine, what can you do about that company which is maybe having unfair competition? At the moment, when you look at these big companies like Amazon, Meta, whoever, actually the conglomeration of data in many ways really empowers us. I can pick up, I'm an Android fanboy, so I've got my Google phone here, and I know that I can pick up that, I can then go to my laptop, I can go to my tablet, and it follows me around, and my history, my likes, and say those of you in that Apple have got that same ecosystem. So there's a great advantages there. There's huge disadvantages, not just for you as a consumer, but for smaller challenger companies who are trying to break through with their innovation. It may be the app stores, it may be search rankings, and it may be publishers that are getting downgraded in favour of those big companies' products and services. But what the Digital Markets Bill does is aiming to do is not just say take Google as a single entity, but recognise that the likes of Google has lots of services that it offers, and actually set up those big companies with strategic market status, and unpicking each of those services and taking a bespoke solution, because some of them might be, Google and Apple and Meta are bigger, most things they do, but when they're starting prototypes, they might actually be quite a small player. So it's not worth worried. They might be innovators and challengers themselves in certain services that they provide, but it's tackling those bigger potential conflicts. And so giving the DMU, Digital Markets Unit, the ability to set parameters for those services they're providing and make pro-market interventions, bespoke interventions that done after a good amount of work with the company, all for the better of the consumer.
And so you mentioned the role of the DMU really being around creating this level playing field, and with multiple benefits for consumers and also for businesses. businesses, I guess I'd be interested on how you see kind of what does success look like. So the DNU works exactly as intended. What's the outcomes that we're really hoping that it's going to achieve for those different groups, for consumers? How would it change people's day-to-day interactions with digital technologies and with the different services that they use?
So I suppose the first bit of success will be that we can have all these challenger businesses coming through, that we can they've got the confidence to continue to innovate here in the UK, not either be swallowed up or feel that they are being pushed down by a marketplace service or a search service that's actually stifling them. I was chatting to a big shopping platform 10 years ago that have really, their business model's been smashed up by the likes of marketplace and Google shopping and these kind of things, and so that so they're having to reinvent themselves 10 years later. So they're desperate to see this kind of legislation through. And whereas I use Google shopping, I use various marketplace services. What more could we have if we've got some of these challenger services? So it's making sure that we can see innovation right the way through. It's more difficult, isn't it, to measure success when actually something gets stifled because you don't really notice it, just drops off the edge. For us as a consumer. So for us, we've got to find a good way of measuring that, and it'll be about consumer satisfaction. And obviously, the third bit that I didn't really talk about because it's coming later and it's not sitting under my remit. They were fearful. CompuServe and AOL were fearful about letting you outside their walled gardens because they didn't really know that they didn't feel they didn't exist without them. And frankly, they don't exist now. Or if they do, they're in a very different form. And so, if we'd done stuff at the end of the 90s, early 2000s, behemoths of companies, which, as I say, do amazing things, but they can stifle innovation as well. We have a lot of, just the significant amount of pornography, the percentage of children that can access pornography is horrifying. So I can totally understand when I've got my colleagues sitting there thinking we need to do this, this and that, but we've just got to be careful that we're not just reacting to something that actually we should have done 20 years ago, trying to put a 20-year-old solution onto a 21st century problem.
Artificial intelligence, blockchain, quantum, etc., or do you understand it as an industry?
Well, so look, I mean, I think I'll give you a couple of examples. I said them before. If you're a publisher and you've got the digital market, you may be coming in from a traditional publishing background, moved online many years ago, but what you're finding is because the regime for publishing is very mature, offline, but the regime for online is nascent. You can have as I say, the search engines in particular can shove you further and further down and basically take away your news content, your IP, whilst pushing you down. So you find it harder to monetize your own product, your own IP. So those are the kind of things that you can define digital markets however you want, but in terms of the digital market interventions that we need to make, that's the kind of area that the kind of things that I'm looking at. So I'm not sure. Yeah, I wouldn't know how to just take the digital markets and define a digital market as a whole. But that's what I mean about the bespoke nature of this, which complicates it hugely because it's putting a lot of not onus on the DMU to have the expertise and also the ability to be able to probe and become quick experts on those bits that they feel they need to be, which the CMA have done for years, frankly. I used to be as the competition and consumer minister in Bays a couple of years before, and funny enough, I had Chris Philp then, the guy that was doing my job then, and he was giving me all this tech bit back at me 2 years ago. I thought, thank God, I've handed it over to him, and then now 2 years later, I'm doing those bit of it, and I've left the easy bit behind. So yeah.
So just to build on the complexity of that question, putting the genie back in the bottle at a point where there are so many emerging technologies, you're trying to put the future genies in the bottle as well. I don't envy that task, but taking a specific example, so through the online safety bill, I think you know, everybody can agree that tackling the experiences of children online is absolutely #1 important thing to do through that bill. How is that bill also going to preempt kind of what happens next? So the potential harms that we don't even really understand yet from ChatGPT, for example.
Yeah, so this will then rub along with the AI white paper that we're developing that'll be out later this year, which starts again. It's a sort of nascent project, not just because we're sort of first movers in this one of the first movers in this area about how we regulate AI and how do you regulate something you can't even define particularly at the moment, and certainly if you're struggling to define it now, how are you going to define what it's going to be in 2 years' time? So that again, that's why I keep coming back to this flexibility. Trying to explain it to you now is sort of because I'm trying to become a world expert in 6 months about this. It's sort of like
Have you asked
nailing the
ChatGPT?
Yeah, actually, someone actually there is a ChatGPT poem about me actually. Someone sent me the other day. Although someone did actually say, I think it's Sean Bailey MP, who said during the online safety bill progress in the Commons, he wrote a speech using ChatGPT about it, and he said it was plausible but very boring. And that's the moment I knew politicians are going to get replaced. Like ChatGPT. But no, you're right, and it's a really good question. But I think it will be the AI white paper that starts to tackle those. But it will be, because it's a white paper rather than bill legislation, it will start to tackle it. It won't be the final word. And indeed, none of these bits of legislation will be. We've got to make it flexible now, as best we can. We'll inevitably come back to it. As we understand where technology is going and those kind of harms that you're talking about. But we've tried to broaden it as much as we can to, as I say, keep freedom of expression, keep freedom of speech, understanding that just because you have the freedom to express themselves, I don't have that doesn't mean I have to hear what you're saying. And so that you need those protections as best you can without stifling debate. But for children, it's far more binary. And so that's why I think we've stamped very heavily down on that, pivoted back to a child protection bill, because I think we can pretty well all agree what children, where the parameters are for children. For adults, it's less clear. And so that's where the flexibility will adapt.
You had a question over there. Thanks. So you started out talking about the machinery of government changes and also about the kind of 3 bills that you were prioritising. Online safety bill is obviously fairly well progressed already, but I'd be interested to know whether those changes have affected the substance of the data bill.
You have as much ownership of your data. What happens with cookies and GDPR and these kind of things, with the being cognizant of the fact that we have international agreements and data breaches now with other countries, so we need to have a sense of alignment to the international treaties that we've signed as well. So that's where the pressure's coming from, rather than necessarily the changes to the online safety bill, I think.
And you talked about the proportionality of measures and when government should back off. It strikes me as a bit inconsistent that with what you're saying, that in the online safety bill, effectively a lot of things are in scope, and I know there'll be proportionality when Ofcom enforces that. But to give you an example, I run a vocabulary tester, and that is in scope because it has a leaderboard. And I feel like it's a bit unfair that I have all this primary legislation that's going to be put on me, all the bureaucracy, risk assessments, etc., when I'm an 18-year-old kid and I'm not someone with like a legal department. And other than Category 1 services, it seems like to me in the online safety bill, there's nothing that discriminates between someone like me and a company like that. And I feel like that's not very proportionate in the primary legislation.
So when you say you're a vocabulary tester, a little bit of vocabulary tester, how does that work? Because it's obviously all to do with user-generated content. So what?
So you're able to, on my vocabulary tester, you're able to try and enter as many words as you can, and if you get a high score, you enter your name, and it's the entering your name part that puts you on the leaderboard. And because you're entering your name and that goes directly to a leaderboard, that counts as the user-to-user service, from my understanding.
Oh, okay. Okay. So it's basically if you're putting something rude there or an abusive sentence instead of your name.
Exactly.
Okay.
So that whole thing's in scope.
Yeah, right, okay, got you. I mean, look, I think what we've tried to do with that is, and I think this is why it's not technology specific. I keep coming back to that because it's we're trying to make sure that you don't get too much onus on that, and the technology. There should be ways of having simple filters to be able to look at some of that stuff. I met Trustpilot the other day, who clearly, you know, big organisation obviously, as you say, but trust is in their name. They're not expecting abuse on their side because someone's just you know, commenting on their experience with a plumber or a restaurant or something like that. They're not expecting some sort of big racist abuse or something about eating disorders or all these kind of things. And so we have tried to put the biggest responsibility on the Cat 1 providers because they've got the biggest reach. So we tried to make it such that it's the people with the biggest reach that are going to have to do most work. So I suppose it's the simple thing we're doing. If you boil down the online safety bill for adult behaviour, it's just trying to get you to adhere to your terms and conditions. So if you've got a term and condition that says we're not going to allow hate speech, we're not going to allow abuse, whether that's just put your name in on that regard, then you ought to have a way of adhering to your terms and conditions that you're setting. But that's for you to set. So some companies may not. One of the other reasons we've tried to be, it's been really difficult. What we don't want to do is have companies say, in that case, I'm not going to set any terms and conditions, because then if you have a free for all, a bit of a Wild West, then that provides obviously a lot of other problems in itself. And there are bigger platforms, not your example, but bigger platforms that actually may revel in that. You know, the people that kind of antidotes, the sort of, you know, the far right, far left antidotes to, in inverted commas, to some of the other social media platforms. But that's all we're trying to get you to do. But I'm sorry if it's too early.
Yes.
I think there's still some people who are operating user-to-user services that still want to know more about how government is going to, and Ofcom are going to define Category 1 services. So is there any recent intelligence or anything more you can tell us there on the online safety bill side? On the digital markets bill that we're waiting for, I think there is concern from smaller players that the bill couldn't come soon enough, essentially. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is, obviously, there is a real risk that some Conservative colleagues are really pro-free market and kind of anti anything that regulates big tech, so to speak. So what essentially should those smaller players be doing to kind of tell your colleagues, and obviously speak to you as well, and telling you how important the legislation is to kind of address some of the harms that are going on in the marketplace?
Let me try to pick that up. So online safety bill, so it's about Cat 1. So I think Ofcom will come up with various code of practices. So you know, it's going through the laws now. I don't want to go through too much detail because otherwise it might some amendments come through. I don't want to tell you something that's then going to change. But Ofcom will come up with a code of practice, including the definition of Cat 1. But effectively, it's going to be, you know, measured in reach. You know, risk and reach is the method, but mainly reach. And I come back to the fact that actually for Cat 1 services, it comes back to the terms and conditions things that I was talking about, because everybody keeps talking about the fact that, but is that enough? The free market, funny enough, that you're talking about in digital markets. So, well, look at Elon Musk. You know, there was a joke doing the rounds not that long ago that said, how do you end up with a multi-million-pound business? You sell it to Elon Musk for 44 billion. Because actually what you've got, his business model is based on advertising, and it's a broad-based platform, and so therefore he's going to want a broad-based advertising base. And so if he's allowing niche things and people are just going down a rabbit hole, then advertisers are just going to walk away, and you know, their share price is going to sink. So it's powerful. It's more powerful than people give it credit for. You know, the fines that we're able to levy, whether it's the digital markets or the online safety, is 10% of qualifying global profit. Now for Google, that'd be 7 billion quid, 8 billion quid fine. Now do you remember when we were looking at some of the stuff that one of the budgets that people were talking about, the fact that it'd be about £8 billion out of the year. There was uproar. and that was a government. So it's a lot of money. It's going to be a big effect. In terms of digital markets, it's interesting. Funny enough, I had a round table yesterday with Kevin Holland, the consumer minister that's taken over me in that role, myself, and some of the smaller companies that you're talking about. And we were talking about exactly this, about some of the bigger companies with big reach in terms of their lobbying approach, and how can the smaller companies compete with that. And actually, funny enough, some of the smaller companies, which is why I'm not mentioning names, were worried about almost having a safe space to do this because of the relationship with big tech. And as I say, I'm a fan of both big and small. I'm not setting one off against another. But if you've got a particular relationship, it can be really daunting with saying, yeah, but I want to control these big guys. But if you're still reliant on big guys for your part of your business model, you're worried about putting your head above the parapet. And I remember this from when I was Minister for Small Business. Late payments is the biggest thing for small businesses, and we've got a small business commissioner who can investigate that stuff. You can add interest to your invoices if you're not getting paid in time. Very few small businesses do it because they think they're going to not renew their contract with me or whatever it is, and that risk does remain. So I would say get out, encourage the smaller challenger companies to get in front of colleagues with demonstrable harms, to actually show the example of exactly what people who, as I said, don't necessarily understand tech, just look at free market as a sensible ideology, and I say that as an unashamed free market conservative, but I don't do ideology. I sort of pragmatic at the end of the day. Getting the balance right. You don't throw the baby out with the bathwater just to chase a textbook.
And kind of what role, I guess, you see the DMU having in helping to create some of that space for some smaller companies to kind of come into the discussion more and feel more able to? Do you see them as kind of having convening power in that way?
Yeah, to a point. I think because it's obviously they will need to understand it themselves, because what are they going to be doing with the businesses that come onto SMS strategic market status? As I say, there's two aspects to. There's a preemptive nature, the conduct requirements, and they'll be able to go and say, right, okay, fine. This particular service, you risk dominating and pushing people down. I've talked about service, search engine things, or marketplace status, and those kind of things. You need to make sure that particular companies or style of companies have are not dampened in that way. And then they have interventions should there still be transgressions. So they will obviously need to have a good understanding, and that will naturally be through convening in the initial case to make those conduct requirements valid and workable.
And you mentioned one of the big challenges is around getting it right and building something where the environment is so quickly changing. I'm interested if there are kind of other examples of where this has worked really well, if there's kind of international best practice, or if you're looking to what's going on in the EU, or other areas as to how this can be most effectively implemented.
Yeah, we are looking all the time at international comparisons on all of these bills. There's not a lot. I don't mean that really, but it's just a lot of it's prescriptive. We instinctively have a different approach from the EU. They tend to be sort of ex post, and we tend to be ex ante. We're trying to sort of move towards an ex ante sort of for ex post. So after the event, we want to try and get towards an ex ante approach so we can preempt a lot of this these problems, because otherwise hence the conduct requirements, because otherwise if you're in a small challenger company, fuck up tester, as an 18-year-old, the last thing I want to do is make sure you're 19, you haven't got a business. I want to make sure when you're 25 you're taking over the world. So we don't want to, but there's no point therefore in having a system that if you do have some abusive system that snuffs you out, then you'll sit there sculling what the hell happened. We want to try and roll the pitch now so that you can continue to develop that. But I think what we've found so far, on the whole, the EU is a little bit more prescriptive than we want to be.
Yes.
I work with an organization that works with a wide network of small independent news publishers across the country. When it comes to digital markets, what steps is government taking to make sure that any attempts to regulate the relationship between big tech and news publishers doesn't sideline the small indies in favor of the large corporates.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. It's a good point. But I suppose it comes back to resource and ability, isn't it? To be able to challenge these things. We're minded. So we haven't published the bill yet, so you'll see more of the detail when we publish the bill. But we're minded to move to a final offer mechanism, which sort of starts to curtail and shorten the entire process in the first place, so that you can get redress a lot quicker. Should be easier to get redress, not so you're not bogged down allowing the big corporates that you're saying, whether it's the corporates that are facing the detriment or the corporates doing the detriment, are with the deeper pockets than you are able to tie
Can you
something knots.
unpack that one level? What is a final offer mechanism?
It's essentially resolving payment related disputes as a last resort. So how do we sit there and say, right, fine, that you're not going through a whole load of negotiation. Give us your final offer effectively for redress, and so we're just trying to short circuit what might be a very legalistic, long, protracted arbitration scheme.
And is it fair to say that this is inspired by the Australian model?
We've been looking at Australia. Yeah.
Has government taken steps to kind of overcome the shortcomings of the Australian model?
Well, that's why we haven't published it yet. Yeah, watch this space for that one.
Well, okay, we'll do. Thanks.
Everyone over here.
Thanks. So I was interested to hear that you started off with the skills gap, particularly in AI, and how important getting a greater diversity of people into the AI industry is. And you mentioned I imagine the Institute of Coding conversion courses, which have great success, got statistically lots of people from underrepresented backgrounds graduating. But I wondered two questions. If you'd done any analysis, anyone has any analysis of how many of those people go on to work in the UK and fill jobs, because it seems to me that starting at that kind of stage of the funnel where people are already quite advanced in their education, it's quite often that people who need visas are actually taking these courses and they're not getting visas to actually continue to work in the UK. And I wondered if there were statistics on that, so how effectively they're filling the UK gap. And then on the subject, the second question was on the subject of the funnel. When the AI roadmap got published, there was a lot on AI literacy and working in teaching more about AI throughout the education system, so you're not reliant on people necessarily converting post-degree, but it's actually, you can realise how amazing an impact you can have with AI before you've done your humanities degree or whatever it is. And that was taken out of the national AI strategy, and I wondered if there were any conversations with the FE about trying to look at how we get people, building up those skills before they get to graduate level, because we know graduate already lacks the graduate pool lacks diversity already.
Yeah, okay, let me give you a really imperfect answer to both of those. Don't have the stats for you, but there will be groups like the AI Council or Digital Skills Council that will have that. Some of the stuff we're doing around talking about finding it hard to get visas. We've got the global tech visa that Tech Nation were handling. That now it's still going to be there for another 6 months, and whilst Tech Nation's now closed down, we're working out who can handle those, because they are hugely valuable to that tech ecosystem that I started off talking about. But again, and then how do you bring in AI at a far earlier level? I mean, it's interesting. I was talking about me being an old man, sort of, with all this stuff with CompuServe. I remember going back even further than that when I was at school. I understand information is, and I sort of thought I knew what technology was. What on earth do I do this? What does it even mean? And they had laser discs back in those days, and no one really. I did tinker around with. I used to do BBC programming and that kind of stuff. I still didn't really know what this IT gig was. And then someone added a C in the middle of it. I thought that is even more confusing. So actually, but there will be, AI will be the thing that's confusing a lot of school kids now. They'll say, well, what does artificial intelligence mean? How is that going to be applicable to me? Not realising that it's driving a lot of stuff already, and it's going to be driving so much more in just a few years' time. So we had, I had again, another roundtable over the City of London with a load of tech businesses and organisations like Kodak and Tech UK, and Guy Opperman, my colleague from Department of Work and Pensions, who is trying to help it with digital skills, but is also looking at how to bring older people back into the workplace, over 50s back into the workplace. These people that are economically inactive groups that we've read a lot about recently, but also the Department of Education. And we realised that actually, you know what, in 6 months of doing this job, it's the first time that the three of us were represented all in the same role at one of these kind of workplaces. So that's what I meant about government being one of the worst siloed institutions in all of this. So that round table was just as valuable at bringing over the city over there, bringing us, despite the fact we're a few yards of each other in Whitehall together, as it was bringing in the practitioners together. So there's loads more work we need to do to do exactly that. That's why it's such an imperfect answer. But it's a really good point.
And on this question of AI, I guess obviously is the hot topic at the moment, and would be really interested, obviously, in the innovation is in the name, and AI, I imagine, is going to be a very big part of what digital innovation looks like over the next few years. But at the same time, we've seen AI coming up in a lot of the conversations around online safety and how the use of AI may be making some of harms worse, how the use of AI affects user privacy and all of these sorts of things. So I'm interested how you, I guess, approach that kind of navigating that tension, sort of how you see the path to resolving some of those potential tensions.
Well, I think this is what we're working on in the lead up to the AI white paper, and that AI white paper is a sense of direction rather than, again, a prescriptive framework at this stage, because we need to. This is a multi-stakeholder framework. This is not something that government's going to sit in and say this is what it must be like, because otherwise we'd be stuffing out that innovation that I was just trying to avoid that exact thing happening. So we need to make sure that, frankly, we have a rough definition of what AI is first of all, so that we can. You're looking at what is it called? Sort of adaptive AI and an autonomous AI. So when you're setting it off, how it can change and it can change under its own remits. That's when it becomes unpredictable if you get it wrong. So I think what was it? It was a Lord's Committee when there was some AI expert. Well, I think he was actually asked a question and said, was it going to sort of have pretty disastrous consequences and potentially kill lots of people? And he answered yes, and the committee said, "Oh my goodness, that was not." So I think he set a bit of a hair running at that point. We clearly want to implement it. You'll be glad to know. But it's understanding what algorithms and AI applications can and can't do. And the fact is that they are autonomous. That's the whole point of artificial intelligence. Means that we've got to get the ethics right, the regulation right, and we can't do that as government. We have to do that with technology companies, with ethicists, and with other groups, build on that together. But we need to do it quite quickly because this is developing at a pace.
Yeah. We had a question at the back.
Sorry, thanks for your time. And you were talking about.
Sorry, could you speak up a little bit?
Okay, so we were talking about the importance of regulatory alignment, and looking at the GDPR, and in the background the Brussels effect. On the other side of the sea, we have the Digital Service Act and the Digital Markets Act being enforced this year. So the government is looking at these two acts and trying to design these bills based on these acts to bring market access to the entrepreneurs from the UK and all this kind of stuff.
That's exactly it. If you're talking about, we're looking both ways across the, to the continent and to the States, and obviously further afield. We're looking at signing. I just signed a Japanese UK digital agreement about a month ago. We're just looking at entering CPTPP with the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade agreement, of which digital and services is going to be a big chunk. So it's a really complex landscape, and that's again why the data bill in particular is going to take some working out and some work through, because what the UK has always done pretty well, having been a mercantile nation for centuries, is that we have managed to tended to manage working for a global world and being the centre of some of that, a good chunk of that, and that's the challenge we're setting ourselves now, being the mercantile nation of the tech world, sailing the seven seas.
Sophia,
Cool. Yeah, we've got a question from online from Hakul. So he's wondering the Data Protection and Digital Information Bill and the Digital Markets Competition and Consumer Bill. Is the government still planning to pass both of these in the upcoming parliamentary session?
Yes, so the Digital Markets Bill will be introducing this session, and Data Bill, I don't know. Is the honest answer? No, I don't think it's. I'm not sure it's this session. So it may take a little to do that for the reasons I've just said.
There's another question there.
Thank you. Can I just pick up on your comment about wanting the UK to be at the centre of sort of the mercantile nation in the digital realm? How concerned are you about some of these other jurisdictions being a bit further ahead in the legislative process and maybe setting the rules of the road? Europe is obviously a market of nearly 500 million consumers, and picking up on the comment the lady made earlier about some of these smaller challenger brands are really calling out for the digital competition bill to be implemented. They're desperate for it. So love to hear your comments and thoughts about that.
Yeah, so both the Digital Markets Bill and the Online Safety Bill, we've got a lot of other countries looking at where we're going with this. Because, as I say, we're looking both ways across the Atlantic and into the continent. America obviously has a different approach in terms of freedom of speech, and the likes of the Online Safety Bill equivalent is never going to be like ours. But there are a lot of other countries that are looking at both of those bit of legislations with a view to taking a lot of it on board themselves. I mean, ironically, something we haven't talked about, senior management liability on the Online Safety Bill, about with sort of criminal liability acts there. We are one of the areas we're looking at, because we've been pushed by Parliament to get that a little bit further, is at Ireland. But Ireland actually have lapped us slightly because we've taken the 5 years on the Online Safety Bill. Is that they've used a lot of our bill as the foundation for theirs, but they've got through that bit. It's not been introduced that long, but the senior management liability, we're now looking back at what they're doing. So what we can then do, if we get our bit right, you'll have the likes of Australia, you'll have the likes of Canada and other some Asian countries that are working, because this is all global. This is all as a global link. If you can't have piecemeal approach on the whole to any of those things, because you're looking at Amazon have got bigger turnover than Israel's GDP. These are enormous companies, and so if we can get it right, there is still time for EU to sort of pivot to make sure that we can have a wider, more cohesive, coherent, global set of regulations. But that may take some time.
I have another question, and then I'll
Sorry,
let you talk back.
I was just thinking, reflecting on those 5 years, having watched it and then been so closely involved in the Online Safety Bill. What have you learned about legislation in a digital age through that process?
I think it comes back to what I was saying at the beginning about the fact that parliamentarians of all sides, all ages, all backgrounds are singularly useless at trying to put a genie back in the bottle and understanding what the internet actually is. And so, the amount of people that are applying 1970s legislation, 1980s legislation to the things that are adapting as we speak is just, you can't do. So it comes back to what we're talking about what small businesses can do with digital markets to explain to free market conservatives about the ability for big corporates. You've got to really explain it in simple terms. I'd say And I don't think it's necessarily going to get any better because, you know, again, I talk about digital skills just because a child is born with a smartphone at the end of his hand or her hand does not make them you know, with the right digital skills. So you need to keep educating politicians just as much as you do the wider public. And so we can all of you, whether you're whatever your backgrounds that you're here for goodness sake, do engage with parliamentarians to make sure they understand that wider ecosystem. You know, I always have a phrase, 2 ears and 1 mouth. I try to use it with that proportion. You know, politicians really do need to understand that tech ecosystem because, like lots of other things, we work on 5-year electoral cycles. Let's face it, or in recent years, slightly less than 5 years. But and you know, every bit of legislation that we've done when we've reacted to something has been pretty terrible legislation. Whether it's the Fixed Term Parliament Act, whether it was the act about protesting outside Parliament. Do you remember Brian Hall? There was the only person in the country that legislation did not apply to was Brian Hall because it was so badly written. So it's those kind of things that, you know, we should not be reacting to stuff unless we really have to, like David. But engage with parliamentarians to make sure they listen and understand that wider concept. That's probably my biggest lesson.
I wanted to pick up on the comment around, well, how also do we engage with the public around these issues? And I was just speaking with a colleague before this about how when we talk about the online safety bill, it's relatively easy for people to kind of get their heads around because it's very much what they're living, you know, their children's experiences online, their experiences online. When we get into kind of competition and pro-competition interventions, it can all get a bit more abstract. So I guess I'd love to hear kind of how you would want to explain it to, you know, members of the public who want to know why they should care about the digital markets.
Yeah,
and
so I suppose.
what difference it can make for them.
Actually, I'll give you one example going back to the online safety bill, but I think it will pertain to that as well. I think you just got to explain stage by stage or continually, rather than just keep going into a vacuum and then coming back and trying to explain big concepts to members of the public as well. And you know, again, parliamentarians tend to react to people are moaning about it, so I'll move on to something else for a little while. But I always talked about myself especially when I was Minister for Small Business, Retail and Hospitality, Leisure, etc. during COVID. I always used to describe myself as the Minister for Unintended Consequences. It's trying to, how do you look for what's coming down the line rather than what's actually happening. And the thing was with the online safety bill, the example I was going to use was coming back to that senior management liability. Because there's all that legislation coming through that and the pressure from Parliament when people are saying, you know what, we should be beefing up the criminal liability. Why can't these act as a really good deterrent for some of these big companies to nominate someone that's going to be responsible for an algorithm, not with the lack of understanding that an algorithm may have been written by 100 people over 3 different continents, half of whom might have been sacked or moved on. There is no way you can hold someone for unintended consequence. You can for deliberate act of connivance. And actually, so what you end up with is, you know, and if you went to speak to Joe Public, or if you went to speak to, again, parliamentarians, they'll actually say, no, that's good, it's a deterrent, that'll work, won't it? Well, no, because actually what you'll find is that you will stifle innovation. First of all, you'll chill investment in innovation because people think, crikey, I don't want to be banged up in prison for something that I really have little chance of being actually directly responsible for. Too big a risk for me, I'm going to go do it somewhere else. And then set your bar so high for prosecution without a direct criminal liability, the connivance that I was talking about, you're never going to prosecute anybody anyway. So actually you get the worst of both worlds. So it's actually explaining that sort of logic, which doesn't make for an easy political leaflet shoving through someone's laptop saying, you know what, I'm working on the online safety bill. You know, and if you're explaining, you're losing in some of these contexts. When someone can say, yeah, but it's about children. It's not easy, but we've got to keep on explaining piece by piece. Someone always says, you know, how do you eat an elephant? One mouthful at a time. It's just carefully gradually working through that.
I'm going to ask one more question, which is, we have a room full of folks here who are working, you know, across industry, academia, civil society, and beyond, and would be really interested to know from you kind of what is it that multi-stakeholder forums like this and like other things that are being convened, what can they do to help the development of the legislation and the enforcement and the enactment be as successful as it can be? What can people do that would be useful?
Well, look, first of all, keep doing what you're doing, making sure you are engaging with the decision makers, because they need to hear all of the voices. And you guys are multi stakeholders framework, as you say. That's not just in this room, and it's not just in London and this country. The whole raison d'etre that we are trying to keep explaining around the world is that internet regulation and governance, as best you can, needs to be done on a multi-stakeholder basis. There are other countries, not just Russia, China, and the actors that we know about, but maybe some African countries and the rest, that actually would rather government has a far bigger role in dictating what is and isn't on their residents' phone screens, and that's the last thing we want. We want a proportionate approach, as I say, that has the right balance between protection and the absolute amazing benefits of connection and debate and discussion around the world that we get from this. We'll only do that by you guys bringing each of your respective disciplines and expertise together to be bigger than the sum of your parts, frankly. But explain to my colleagues.
Thank you so
And me.
much. And I think the celebration of multi-stakeholderism feels like a fitting point to adjourn for drinks. So you can all join me in thanking the Minister for joining us.